A different morning again. We like to keep you guessing. Debbie and I thought it would be a lot of fun. It's a holiday weekend, and it's kind of an off weekend, and so we said, let's do something. Let's recap James real quick this morning, and kind of run some threads together, because there's so much we talk about when we prep these messages that we don't get to say here. We just don't have enough time. So we thought, well, let's have some fun. So we'll see how fun this is. I love the set. I appreciate our worship leaders who really think and pray through the conversations we're having. And that first song especially, I'm fighting a battle you've already won. I feel like that's the book of James. Like, there is this thing where you read the book of James and you think to yourself, oh, this is great. He's telling me everything to do. And then you think you're just going to go out and do it. And you realize there's a battle out there. and it's not so simple, which is why we have tried to peel back this book and look at it in a way that we think it was intended to be received. So we're going to start by kind of putting a summary statement up. And make sure I corrected it, Deb, because I did make the corrections, I think. Here's kind of the theme we think for the book of James. Resilience doesn't look like rigid control. And I'll let you comment on this in just a second. Resilience doesn't look like rigid control. If you read the book of James, you think, oh, here it is. He's just outlining, like, do this, do this, do this, do this. And then if I do this, I have this sense that I'm in control, and I've got my life put together, and I'm doing what God wants. Resilience doesn't look like rigid control, though. It is the capacity to endure because we've abandoned the safety of our personal strategies and stepped into a lifestyle of honest vulnerability before God and others. Now, we're going to unpack a couple of words, especially that word vulnerability is going to become a cornerstone word this morning. But would you like to expand on that definition before we get into it? You want to make some comments, or you just want to go?
Oh, well, I just think that as we talked this week, this whole idea, I think when we just off the cuff, when we think of resilience, it's like getting stronger. Like when I go to Pilates, my muscles get stronger. They're less vulnerable because they get stronger. So I'm less vulnerable to injury and that kind of thing. But this type of resilience that we're talking about, you never actually get to lay down vulnerability. It's like you have to come to peace with vulnerability in order to actually get this kind of spiritual resilience. And part of why we have personal strategies is because we're trying to manage our vulnerability. We're trying to find some way to feel more safe, more comfortable. And so the book of James is really all about the only way to that is faith, is an all-out dependence on God. And that's hard because that means that our vulnerability has to be the companion of our resilience.
Yeah. This idea of personal strategies. We live in the West, man. We organize everything. We bullet, we highlight, we summarize, and then we implement. Right? It was interesting. Kurt sent us an email this week of a job description for a business that's hiring a chief resilient officer. Yeah, no lie, chief resilient officer. Of course, the joke of the staff is we need one of those because Cecil chose a really bad theme for the year. My take is life is going to happen no matter what. And resilience has to come from this conversation we're having, not from just me growing my personal strategies. But that's what companies are trying to do, and it reflects the culture we live in. We've got to have strategies to get you more resilient. You've got to take ownership of everything. Not that there isn't personal responsibility, not that we don't have to act. We're not saying that effort we're wiping effort off the table. Christians should never talk about effort, right? That God's not opposed to the effort. It's this purchasing our own salvation, if you will, through a strategy. So I think that's the summary of James, but it's a hard one to walk out, right? How many times anybody get up this week and think, I don't feel resilient today? Yeah. Debbie and I met a while ago, and I told her, I said, I woke up this morning and I'll talk more about this because we're going to work through this. But I said, man, I didn't even want to come. Something in my soul just said, who are you to keep talking about this stuff? That's hard. Okay, that's your pastor, maybe, unless you decide, well, he needs to be out of here for that. But it's like, if I'm feeling that, I know you're feeling that. Like, we all feel that. So how do we grow in this capacity to become more resilient, which is really what I think the book of James is all about. So we're going to leave this up on the screen so you can kind of check us as we talk through it, because we've got about 4 kind of what we think are integrated themes throughout the book of James that really make up this whole thing. And so we'll start with this. I'll read it, and then we can talk more about it, Deb. Vulnerable faith versus empty words. James 2:17, so you see, faith by itself isn't enough unless it produces good deeds. It is dead and useless. Vulnerable faith versus empty words. We probably need to talk a little bit about this idea of vulnerability. Should we start there?
Sure.
Okay, go.
Oh.
How vulnerable
Yes.
do you feel?
Yes. Okay. So
She likes me to do
This is
this.
a study and observation. Yeah. So what does it mean to be vulnerable? I've often thought about this because I'm a speaker, and the words vulnerable and authentic and those types of words are thrown around a lot. It's like, well, that speaker was really authentic or really vulnerable. And as a speaker, there is a difference. And authentic is not a bad thing. Authentic is that you're truthful and real in the moment. But I've often thought about the fact that I listen to speakers and I go, yeah, they were authentic. They were self-disclosing, which means that they told something about themselves that was true. But generally, if you're speaking somewhere, self-disclosing also generally has a wrap-up. There's some kind of conclusion to the story that you're telling that has an end. Vulnerability is a little different in that when you're really present vulnerable, there generally isn't an end to the story yet. And you're rather a mess in it. And so there's vulnerability is when I don't know what I'm doing and I'm limited in my ability to fix this thing. And maybe I don't even know where God is in it. And I'm just kind of sitting here unsure. That's vulnerable. That's the place where we haven't got it figured out and we don't know where to go next. And we feel to the core of our being sometimes the anxiety of, I don't have the ability to fix it or change it. And that is the core of what often moves us to something, someone or something other than God, especially if God is a little quiet about it in the moment. Yeah.
So Debbie and I talked at length about this idea of vulnerability and then authenticity because, as you can imagine, I did, being in ministry from the 90s, the early 2000s and on up till now, authenticity is the buzzword. It is the cultural, like we bench everything on how authentic are you. And as we dug into this, I was really intrigued with the idea that to be vulnerable is to allow yourself to expose a part of yourself where there is no resolution yet, that it's an ongoing mess you're in. Whereas authenticity, we control the message often. So authenticity has become a benchmark in our culture, and I'm afraid we think it sounds really noble, but what it is it's us controlling the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that it's probably fair to say that you can be authentic and vulnerable at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah, but you can be authentic and not vulnerable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the danger there, I think, we didn't talk about this, but the danger there for me is, especially in groups with young people, our younger audiences, we can walk into a setting and we can demand a certain level of authenticity, but it's only how we've defined it. It's an area where we're willing to be partially expose ourselves, if you will. And I think that to me is the troubling trend in the West, is that we embrace authenticity to that degree and never understand how to move it into full vulnerability. Does that make sense? Did I say that okay?
I think, and I think, okay, to be totally honest, and we're kind of veering off into like a really big subject here about whether we should be authentic or vulnerable in any and all situations. Wisdom says that we should always be authentic in the sense that we should not be deceiving of people of who we are, okay? We should live in truth. We should have places where we can be vulnerable in our circles. That may not be everybody in our circle, because some people may not be ready for our vulnerability. But we should have someone in our circle who we can be vulnerable with at any point in our life. Does that make sense? I mean, I'm putting nuance here that was not really a part of this message, but
we
yeah.
do this to each other. Either I'm going to chase a rabbit or she is, but one of us is going to chase a rabbit this morning. Does that make sense? I want to see some heads. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, good. Yeah, I think that's the problem, is that we don't have opportunity to sit long enough in our culture. In fact, I've noticed this again. Every once in a while, I'll get in my truck and I will not turn my music on. I got my granddaughter last week, and we got in we call it the pool this time of year, the hot tub, and we're hanging out, and she goes, "Pops, music." She knows me, right? Like we're always playing music. What happens when you turn the music off? What happens when you shut that down and you can sit with this idea of where are you authentic and what's healthy authenticity, and where are you vulnerable? And what does that look like? It's a really hard line to cross, I think, because to be vulnerable is to begin to own the limitations of yourself.
Yeah, and I think to complicate it further is we're all vulnerable. It's not like we're going to become vulnerable one day. We're all vulnerable by nature of being human beings because we're limited, okay?
Yeah.
So vulnerability is a natural thing for all of us. The rub comes in what we do when we get the inkling, when we feel it. I had something happen to me a couple weeks ago, and it opened me up to a vulnerability that I wasn't prepared for, and it kind of threw me for a loop. And I realized about a week later, I'm not any more vulnerable today than I was the day before I found out about that thing. It's just that day I became aware of it in a different way. So vulnerability is not something that comes and goes in our life. It's a constant, but maybe our awareness of our vulnerability comes and goes to a certain degree. I think that back to the book of James, James is great about pointing out different ways we handle our vulnerability when it comes to our attention. Or maybe when it's not in our attention, we're feeling it underneath the surface, but we're not really admitting it because we're just kind of glossing it over with, again, some strategy. I think.
Yeah, so can we talk about strategies for just a second? Because you and I were talking before, I think anxiety is a strategy. Now, it can be an internal thing too, right? It comes up and you didn't necessarily make it come up.
No, anxiety is the idiot light on my dashboard that tells me I'm vulnerable.
Yeah.
That's what anxiety is. It's like the little red light going off. It's like, neat, neat. Hey, hello, you're a vulnerable person. And what are you going to do about that? Or how are you, what's your response?
Yeah. And
what's your response to your vulnerability?
And so those responses are the things we're looking for. What for me, again, I turn my music on, I turn it up loud. Like it's a way to drown out the world. I like music. There's nothing wrong with that, but is it a way that I'm drowning out my world in that moment? And we embrace culturally, even as Christians, we embrace so many strategies that are not healthy, right? It's easy to grab food. It's easy to grab a drink. It's easy to what? There are some people who exercise. I hear those people exist. That's a coping mechanism. I have not discovered that. I wish I need to, but I guess No.
Well, this is a good segue back
Okay.
into our outline, actually, because you started with this vulnerable faith versus empty words. So
Yeah.
here's the strategies
Yeah.
that we can choose. So, oh man, this is going to be tough. Um, so this idea of empty words here is sometimes like we use like, oh gosh, I don't know if I want to say this or not. Like it, James says it, so I'm going to say he says it. Like we just go to these kind of mental assents, like you believe there's a God. So I'm just like, oh well, I believe there's God. We kind of do this kind of Pollyanna spiritual truth thing, and it's kind of like a salve on our vulnerability. Like we're not really sitting there going like, oh shoot, well how am I going to move toward God in this place? We're just like, oh well, God will make it okay. It's like the platitudes. Platitudes is a good word. We want to use platitudes rather than really examine the places where we need to go deeper with God in our faith. And so these empty words, because even the demons believe these things. That's not going to necessarily help you with your vulnerability. It's going to distract you from it. So we can spiritually, well, I'm not going to use that. We can use spiritual phrases to distract us from the actual vulnerability.
Yes.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I was just letting it sit for just a second. Yeah. Yeah. So the next one of the bullets we had down here was this idea of vulnerable speech versus gossip. Can we carry what you just opened up into that realm? James talks a lot about our words, our speaking, the way we speak to each other, and how that tends to become it is one of those things we grab and we try to hold on to, and we try to make us feel better when we speak in ways we should not speak. We feel better about ourselves. Well, they're really worse. We would never say they're worse off, right? We're Christian enough to know that. We've been in the church long enough, most of us, to know, well, you shouldn't say that I'm better than somebody else. But we have ways of saying it that turn us into gossips, that turn us into spreaders of misinformation. For why? Just to protect ourselves. Because again, if I'm vulnerable about who I am, I don't have all the answers, and maybe their place in life makes me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I do think too that when we're in touch with our vulnerability, or when we get pricked by it, there's often a kind of explosive response that we give. I've had this happen in my relationship with Kurt a lot. Like there'll be like a series of things that happen, and like something internally is building in me, and then like he'll say something, and I'll just like vomit on him. And it's like, and I'm like, where did that come from? He's like, where did that come from?
Don't look up, Kurt. Don't agree. Just keep your head down.
And it's only in some self-reflection that I'm like, where did that come from? And then I realized, oh, it was X, Y, and Z. It wasn't the A that he threw into the conversation. It was the X, Y, and Z that like prepped that. And then what comes out of my mouth is a reaction to my own internal reality. And I'm like, okay, so honestly, yeah, that thing, I just really wanted to say this. And all that other stuff was related to this building up that was happening inside of me that I wasn't willing to be present to. And I couldn't just say, I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling overwhelmed, or whatever the thing is that I'm feeling.
Yeah, and we're gonna get there again.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I keep pushing her down rabbit trails, but there is this level of pace in our culture that doesn't allow for that either. So Sue and I right now are separated a little bit in the sense that, that's the wrong word to use, but in this day and date,
You're at different locations.
we're at different locations as she's in San Antonio because her dad is on hospice, and things are just continuing to progress there. But when she is here, we have to be very careful because there's so many emotions, so many feelings, so many things churning that it's very easy to snap at each other when the thing you snap about, this is what I think you're talking about, is not really the issue at all, right? And so to be vulnerable is to actually be able to name the thing that's welling up in you before you snap, to be able to have that kind of godly awareness of what's going on in your life. And I just don't think, I think right now, and I know I'm going to start to, I'm 60 now, so I'm going to say things that make me sound really old. I just think our culture is spinning at a pace faster and faster that's going to not allow this, and I think this is something we're going to have to learn to fight. This is fight against. It's because if you don't take that time, if you don't have that reflection in your life, then it's very easy to continually just explode. I did it several times this week. I had to go to graduation Friday night. You know how many crowds or people are at graduation? Do you know what crowds do to my soul when they're not organized and neat and moving in a healthy fashion? You know what it does when
Have you ever met a crowd like that?
That's actually a good question. I should sit with that question. So this idea of resilience comes from being able to make peace with this vulnerability, including in how it comes up, that vulnerability. Can you be vulnerable in your speech? Can you name it even though you can't solve it? Which is not my MO. If I name it, I want to be able to solve it, right? That's a problem for me. So yeah. I had a bullet under this one. Am I taking too long here? We had this bullet of the idea of seasonal vulnerability. I don't know why it made it under this bullet.
It's
under
not.
this.
Yeah, it comes in later.
Okay, all right. Then I'm going to leave it alone.
We'll punt it.
I'm gonna leave it alone. I'm gonna leave it alone. So can we move to the next
Yes,
bullet?
move.
Okay. Vulnerable love versus favoritism. Vulnerable love versus favoritism.
Yeah. So James writes, "My dear brothers and sisters, how can you claim to have faith in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ if you favor some people over others? For example, suppose someone comes into your meeting dressed in fancy clothes and expensive jewelry, and another comes in who is poor and dressed in dirty clothes. If you give special attention and a good seat to the rich person, but you say to the poor one, 'You can stand over there or else sit on the floor,' well, doesn't this discrimination show that your judgments are guided by evil motives?"
He doesn't mince words.
He doesn't. But if you put it in the context of when we love other people, it opens up our vulnerability. Like, honestly, there's something that happens to us as human beings if we hang around people that are disadvantaged. Like, if you go sit by the poor person, is that poorness going to rub off on you? Because honestly, if we're sitting by the rich person, we're kind of hoping that rubs off on us. That somehow we're advantaged because of their privilege. Or do we feel guilt because we're not giving or we're not, what is it? Love invites us to feel the vulnerability. Because even at times when we give love, it's not going to be returned. It's not quid pro quo loving somebody. So favoritism can at times show us how we're not willing to really be present to the vulnerability that exists in loving other people, no matter their station, no matter their ability to help us or hurt us.
Yeah, it's interesting because I just thought of something that we didn't talk about this week. Is Sue and I have hit that number where when people find out we're going to be married 37 years next month, and people hear that, and it starts to evoke a bit of a response. Like, it's just the number 37 is it's harder and harder to find, right? It's because of what we're seeing in our culture. And I think this authentic love is part of this, right? Like if you were to ask me what's the secret behind your success, the church answer is, well, it's God. Well, okay, great. But lots of people go to church and their marriages don't survive. Why? If there isn't that ability to move into this area of authentic love. I know it's not the poor person that he's talking about in this passage, but we often can look at our spouses, don't elbow each other, whatever's going to happen here. We can often look at them and think they are lesser than us, right? We can show favoritism towards ourselves, and that's often what starts us down a really dark path. So I'm sorry I dropped that in. We didn't even talk about that this week. So
It's fine.
I was looking for some approval, but not going to get it. So it's all right. It was my idea.
Well, I do think that there is a judgment that we often bring to our relationships, even the healthy ones, like because it's so much easier for it to be their fault than ours. So if we're in a disagreement about something, then aren't they wrong? Yeah.
It can't be me.
Yeah.
Cannot be me. Okay, we're going to keep moving because I know there's other stuff here to talk about. Vulnerable wisdom versus worldly ambition. Vulnerable wisdom versus worldly ambition. James 3:13. If you're wise and you understand God's ways, prove it by living an honorable life, doing good works with the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you're bitterly jealous and there is selfish ambition in your heart, don't cover up the truth with boasting and lying. I love that because it's like, I think he's writing saying, look, it's going to be there. There's going to be some dark stuff in your heart. Just don't cover it up. Don't go hide. For jealousy and selfishness are not God's kind of wisdom. Such things are earthly, unspiritual, and even demonic again. He's not mincing words. For where there is jealousy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and evil of every kind. But the wisdom from above is first of all pure. It is also peace, loving, gentle at all times, willing to yield to others. But Debbie, what if they're not right?
What if who's not right?
The others
Oh.
that I don't want to yield to.
Oh.
That I put myself in this place where, look, I'm wise because I know what God says. I've got the answer. Let me give it to you. You're not the wise one. And what does it do? It puts me in a position of wanting to win the argument, which is what I call worldly ambition, leaning on that end of the spectrum versus authentic wisdom. Talk about that.
Well, vulnerable wisdom is, I think I may be right. I think I may. I mean, we've talked about this before, this idea of the sin of certainty. That's generally not vulnerable wisdom. It's at any given moment, we're going to try to be discerning about what to do, about what to believe, about where God is, but we're always going to be vulnerable in that place because we're limited to know. And this is where faith comes in, and also a fair amount of humility in that to the best of my ability in this moment, I'm going to humbly move forward and stay open.
Yes.
And there probably is something that the other person, even though we don't maybe agree with everything, has to add to that conversation.
Yes. Yeah. So for nerds like me that went to seminary, when I encounter somebody who says, well, you're not a Calvinist, are you? My typical response is, well, Calvin wasn't a Calvinist. This is that whole thing of that trying to embrace the vulnerable side of what it means to be alive and a believer today. There's a raging debate right now in certain denominational circles about the role of women in church, and it's interesting because there's one female I follow extensively. She graduated from the same institution I graduated from, so I have some admiration because I know that's not a place a lot of women graduate from with the level of degrees she has. But she challenged the denominations this past week with a comment, and it was that she was just being very vulnerable. She said, look, if you're trying to take a certain conviction and raise it to the level of Orthodox Christian faith, then we've got a problem here. And of course, as she's saying this, she's just getting hammered from all sides. But she didn't say she'd figured it out. She didn't say she had solved the whole issue. She just opened herself up to the comment because she's kind of at the center of some of the storms. And she's like, I don't know what else to tell you. Is you're lifting a conviction. I would say it another way, and you can come in behind all this if you want. But this whole idea of vulnerable wisdom, I think we have grown up again in the West where everything is so articulated, including our apologetics. And apologetics we see as our learning things about the Bible to defend God. And I don't know if you've read the whole Bible or not, but he doesn't seem to need a whole lot of defending. Like, he is going to achieve what he is going to achieve. And the genius, the thing that makes him God, is he's going to achieve all of that with all of my screw-ups on public display. He's going to, no matter how many things we get wrong about men or women in the church, he's going to achieve. And are we willing to be vulnerable enough? I like how you said that, to say, you know, how did you say it? I think, I might, I am not sure, not being so certain that we get dogmatic. Where do you see dogmatism in the scriptures? It's all over the religion of the Pharisees. It was the religious leaders of Jesus' day. They were the ones who were the certain ones. And Jesus kept going out to the hillside where the people were going, we aren't sure, we can't do that, so help us.
Well, this is always a place, again, where we can discover our own strategies. You know, where are our personal strategies of ambition and jealousy, perhaps, coming into play and derailing our wisdom into ambition, which is different than wisdom. Yeah. But again, this core of humility, like humility itself is a recognition that we're vulnerable. I mean, the very nature of humility is to recognize and be at peace with being vulnerable. I'm a limited human being. I am not God. I do not know everything. I make mistakes. I mean, this is the heart of humility, is understanding the rightful order of the world. And that our place is not at the top. It's somewhere down here. And even in the midst of our human order, there are lots of people that know more than we do and maybe are wiser than we are. And so going into this idea of wisdom with this right thinking, this, which is like embracing our vulnerability in a way that causes us to think rightly about ourselves. Yeah.
In a culture, and I'm going to try to say this as delicately as possible, so you'll forgive me if I don't. In a culture where wisdom is not draped in vulnerability, it's being draped in certainty. And this is, as James would say, this is the thing. It's coming out of our passions and desires, and that's what's tearing the church apart right now.
Yeah, and I would say that that's obviously a misinterpretation of wisdom.
Agreed.
That's like intellectual authority or something, but it's not wisdom.
Agreed.
Yeah.
No, I wholeheartedly agree. But it is a version of wisdom that allows us to do what? Create strategies to feel very comfortable about my life. Let's take an easy one. You know, my retirement fund is going to get me through the closing years of my life, and it's going to be a great life. I have now come to a full understanding that the older you get, the harder it is going to get. If you don't like that, there are churches that would teach you otherwise, but I am just telling you, I don't see anywhere that it gets easier. Because the older you get, the more you should be growing in vulnerable wisdom anyway. And as you grow,
the older you get, the more vulnerable you will become.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so let's take that. So we had two little bullets that we tagged on here that are kind of the context of all this. So the first is just the historical church culture. Can we go to that for just a second? I put this reference down, James 1. He says, 26, if you claim to be religious but don't control your tongue, you're fooling yourself, and your religion is worthless. We have developed a historical culture in our, let's just say in the States, because I can't comment on the rest of the world. I don't live there. We've developed this thing that matches the very thing Jesus was warning against. Your whitewashed tombs, or the cup that's dirty on the inside but clean on the outside, and all we do is show everybody the clean side. This is not being dislodged. It feels like this assault against vulnerability is amping up in our culture again. Thoughts on that? I know I just totally set you up on that one.
Well, you know, what's really lovely about Journey is that I don't feel that here. But yes, I have been in many church settings where, and from my own personal background, very, very true, because if you have a dad that is a pastor and has affairs and then leaves the church, what you're going to present to everybody is very different as far as like, nothing to look at here, everything's fine, everybody's fine, you know, this is now the family line about all that. You're not walking around, you know, in this transparent honesty about, you know, my family is really messed up. No, you're going to be like, we're fine, we're doing fine here, nothing to look at here. This has often been a posture of the church, you got to look good on Sunday, you got to, you know, make sure the kids are dressed and they, you know, everybody looks presentable on Sunday. And that's not really helpful in the long run.
You did a good job. Your grandsons are here and they're dressed this morning. I like that.
Oh, but only one of them brought church clothes. So don't look at the other one like I care. But, you know, the one brother did tell his other brother, you didn't bring church clothes. Yeah, so.
To which we said, what are church clothes? What is this language you speak of? So let's push the historical a bit further, because we don't want to go super long this morning. Let's talk about this, what I've called this formational shift. You may have a better word for it. But as we keep talking and pushing into what is it? What is it that for me, I think God has helped me identify as something that is problematic in the church in the West? This movement from information to formation, but it's all within the context of a culture. And the culture is working against us. It's pushing on us to keep us from being vulnerable, because it's almost like, now again, we didn't use this kind of illustration or metaphor, but it's almost like the weak ones of the herd are going to get picked off, and vulnerability feels like one of those words. Like if you live out the book of James the way he has written it, it feels like you're going to become a weak one in the herd of humanity. And what's adding to that stress is the pace of change in our culture. That's just, I think it's just a full-on assault to this conversation about formation. That I put in my notes that in 1969 we put somebody on the moon, unless you believe we did, and then that's okay too. But we put somebody on the moon, and today you carry in your hand the computing power to do that yourself, in a sense. Like, that's from 69 to 2026. But now we're looking at even changes that are going to outpace all of that in even the next 10 years. And that kind of change in a culture is unmooring. We start to feel untethered, which I think also is what creates our drive for certainty, if that makes sense. That we want to be certain about what we want to be certain about, because our legs are being knocked out from underneath us. you're being very quiet, but
Yeah.
I will add this, and then you're gonna come in here. I think this is why all throughout the scriptures, Christians are invited to be sojourners. We are invited to not, like Abraham, have a country of our own, in a sense. We are invited to continually be aware that we are moving through this life, and this life is a part of the grand story, the grand narrative. So let's just be really positive. Let's say we all get 100 years. It's a nice round number. That 100 years starts to weigh on us, I think, the older we get. But the reality is, it's 100 years in the grand scheme of thousands or millions of years. But how do we keep that perspective? Because especially when the formational shifts of our culture, when culture is going to start changing so rapidly and it starts to feel like the things we thought we could trust at one time we can no longer trust, we have to evaluate our place in the world. Even our source of incomes are being threatened. Can God still really be God in the middle of all that?
I think the twist on this conversation, again, plays into this idea that our true resilience is going to be accomplished in our ability to make peace with God and our vulnerability. Because our changing cultures and the changes that are coming are going to increase our awareness of our vulnerability for the entire world, actually. We have an opportunity as followers of Jesus to actually make a difference because we live peacefully with our vulnerability. Because we can stay in the game and be resilient even when we feel vulnerable, and maybe increasingly so. Because we do have a constant in our life. We do have an unchanging God that can sustain us and in the end makes all things well. But it's going to take us staying present with Him and one another with the things we feel in the process and continually taking those things and being honest about them and working through them together in community with the Holy Spirit. So that is right now, honestly, I mean, I don't want to sound like prophetic, maybe it is, the hope of the world at this moment is that we, as followers of Jesus, can learn to do this, can deepen our faith, and live with the awareness of our vulnerability at the same time.
Yeah, and if that's what resilience looks like, if it's not about rigid control, and if God is true to who we believe He is going to continue to pry our fingers off of the things that we attempt to hold on to that give us rigid control in our lives. I've said it before, when I graduated seminary 30 years ago this month, when I graduated, I had already a direction in mind. I was going to have outlined all 66 books of the Bible. I would have these folders dedicated to every book of the Bible, and from that I would just spew all kinds of wisdom. I don't think that lasted 12 months. As God began to pry my fingers off the idea that all you have to do is learn the principles. All you have to do is learn the theme of every book. All you have to do is learn all the little do's and do nots. If it were that easy, the Pharisees would have had a better ministry. But it's not. So I love that. I love that. Resilience doesn't look like rigid control. And in the process of God pulling our fingers off the things we hold on to, we're going to learn more and more what our personal strategies are. And that's where, unfortunately, you have to be willing to be honest with yourself and others. We don't often, we invite sharing around here a lot, but we say all the time, you don't have to share if you don't want to. We're not asking people to air their dirty laundry, but the real question is, are you in community? Is Journey becoming the kind of community where you can recognize your personal strategies and own them and walk in? My son said something a couple of years ago when he was going through a very dark time in his life. He said, Dad, I feel like the church should be a place, not just Journey. He was talking about the church in general. The church should be a place where I could walk in and own the fact that I'm a mess. But he didn't feel like that. He didn't feel like that. I think this is why sometimes you'll hear Christians say a 12-step group feels more like church sometimes. Why? Because everybody walks in messed up and they don't try to hide it. What would that look like if we owned the messes? It's not about staying there. Please don't hear me say God doesn't want you to change. But transformation only comes when we become vulnerable. If we are not open to this vulnerable process, I don't believe there's transformation. I think you can take information and you can strategically try to implement some change in your life. But you know what's going to happen? And we can kind of close with some of this, but I told Debbie a while ago, I said, do you know anxiety was for me has never been one of those things in my soul that I don't live a very anxious life until about, 3 or 4 years ago. And now it's this, God has brought me to this place where I'm learning some things about my strategies, but it's through anxiety. It's through me recognizing, well, why am I feeling that anxiety? Why is my blood pressure? Yeah, I've never had blood pressure problems till 2 years ago. What is that? What is my strategy? It's a real thing. How do we become more vulnerable? That's what the book of James is all about, releasing that rigid control. Thoughts? We can close this up, wrap it up. Did we give everybody enough? You can take with this and do what you like. I just believe so many times that it's not about you guys coming together and listening to the expert. It's about having some conversations. I think this is what Jesus did on the hillside. I just think this is more of the way teaching should occur, and we'll continue to interact with you more. So let me pray for us, and then we'll go on. Father, sometimes it just feels like there's not enough time, there's not enough hours to pull back, to allow you to do the work that I know you want to do. So we take this morning in this conversation, and I just pray that you would continue to work it through each one of our lives, that we would be willing to be more honest about these personal strategies that we cling to, that we think are going to be the things that make us more resilient, give us control of our life. May we be open to how your Spirit invites us into that place of surrender. May we grow in that capacity. May we be willing to articulate it, to lay it before you and before others, and to allow ourselves to walk in this space of vulnerability in the Spirit. We don't pray this to be right. We pray this to be the kind of people that can experience you in such a way that there's transformation that's so genuine that people want to be around us, that we don't actually have to go pick it anywhere. We can just be who we are in the spaces you've planted us. And that should be enough for people to begin to pay attention, for your Spirit to be able to invite them into this conversation, into this way of walking with you. So these are our words this morning. These are our hearts. We lay them all before you. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen.